Before we delve into the history of the first modern bubble, I'd like to give a quick overview on economic bubbles and their effect today. A bubble is an economic cycle that is created by a surge in asset or stock prices. This fast inflation is followed by a quick decrease in value, referred to as a crash or a bubble burst, and often leads to a recession. Two bubbles you might be familiar with are the 2008 mortgage crisis and the 1999 dot-com bubble. During the dot-com bubble, for example, investors bought technology stocks at ridiculously high prices during the infancy of the internet. When investors realized they had overpaid, a large market correction occurred, leading to the recession in 2000. I suggest watching my favorite movie, The Big Short, for a vivid portrayal on how exactly the 2008 bubble occurred.
England in 17 was in dire shape. Robert Harley, newly appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is England's fancy equivalent to the US Secretary of the Treasury, comes to the office to find that no one knows exactly how much England is in debt. Everyone knew that they were screwed, but estimates of the national debt vary widely, so Harley did a deep dive into England's finances. In the end, he estimated that England was £9 million in debt, which in 2017 would be worth almost £950 million. Well, Harley thought, let's just ask the Bank of England to lend the government to relieve the debt. That doesn't work because the Bank of England was currently controlled by the Liberal Whig Party and refuses to play nice with the new Tory-controlled parliament, which Harley himself is a part of. He cannot advocate for rising taxes either because the minority Whigs would prevent that from passing. Foreign investment was completely off the table as their already large debt made them risky borrowers, making any future loans cripplingly expensive, and they just came off fighting brutal wars with the biggest lenders in Spain and France. England cannot control themselves when it comes to habitual war with any of their neighbors for any reason, and once again, war has drained the national coffers. So Harley turns to other means to find the money to relieve England's debt and makes the acquaintance of businessman John Blunt, secretary of the ironically named Hollow Sword Blade Company. Blunt had a knack for making money in creative ways, with a track record of artificially inflating demand for army debentures, basically army IOUs, to gain recently government-confiscated land in Ireland. This is now most certainly illegal, but we'll just ignore that because no one called him out on it at the time and he made a lot of money. To test the waters, Harley gave him the role of administering the relatively unsuccessful Bank of England lottery. Blunt turned that ship around immediately by promising guaranteed prizes, making it immensely popular. In the short term, it provided much-needed short-term capital for the government, but exacerbated the long-term debt. Seeing this financial success, Blunt and Harley devised a devious design to delete the debt. The plan goes as follows. First, create a new company. Second, convince the government to allow the new company to assume the government debt by converting them into shares into the company. Third and fourth, in exchange, the government would pay 6% interest a year that would be used as dividends to stockholders. Fifth, since there would be no incentive for individuals to give up their government debt, Harley would have to get Parliament to give the company a monopoly on trading rights with South American ports. And finally, the company's potential for profit has to be hyped up to the point where everyone would start drooling at the mouth for unimaginable returns and willingly invest in a new company with no background in international trade. In 1711, after a long public propaganda campaign and an act of parliament, the South Sea Company was founded and granted the monopoly. Nothing really happens for 2 years until the Treaty of Utrecht ends the War of Spanish Succession, bringing a temporary peace between England and Spain. The terms of the treaty made Spain grant Britain the Asiento, a license to participate in the slave trade with any of the New World Spanish colonies. However, the conditions of the Asiento were limited, as Spain didn't want to grant a political and religious opponent that they just fought a war with too much influence in the very profitable New World. The South Sea Company was required to reach a quota of transporting 4,800 slaves a year and had to pay duties on the export of slaves regardless of the quota's fulfillment. Britain was also strictly limited in the amount of ships that they could send for trade, which later turned out only one ship could be sent yearly. These conditions meant that the South Sea Company was nowhere near generating the profits to sustain itself, let alone the profits envisioned by the propaganda-driven hype. During the South Sea Company's participation of the slave trade, an estimated 42,000 people were forced to depart Africa, and another 7,000 were estimated to have died during the crossing to the New World. For the next 5 years, the company would slowly chug on. In 1714, Blunt removed Harley from any involvement with the company, and the Prince of England became the mostly figurehead role of governor of the company. In 1718, the king himself, King George, became governor of the company, which started to build momentum for the incoming bubble. Everybody started to have confidence that the company couldn't fail because the monarchy was now involved. If it failed, it would reflect a failure on the monarchy and potentially upend the status quo, which made the South Sea Company, like the banks most involved in the 2008 housing crisis, too big to fail. And in 1719, Blunt had another idea. Great Britain has more debt than it's ever had because it couldn't help itself from thirsting the blood of its neighbors. Britain was now £31 million in debt, and the South Sea Company wanted to buy that debt at £7.5 million to repeat their initial scheme of converting the debt into company shares. To actually generate profit from this scheme, the value and volume of stock sold would have to increase. This leads into the year 1720, when the bubble starts to expand rapidly and the hype train becomes unstoppable.
The South Sea Company gained new prominence in 1720 when Parliament passed the Bubble Act. Given the financial success of the South Sea Company, investment mania spread across Britain, including insurance, financial services, fisheries, mining, and agriculture. as well as hoaxes ranging from air pumps for the brain to machine guns with square bullets. In response, Parliament passed the Bubble Act of 1720, mandating that all joint stock companies have a royal charter, which came with a £300,000 price tag. The effect of the Bubble Act was to solidify the South Sea Company's monopoly as it cut funding from all competitors. Historians have uncovered that the Bubble Act was riddled with corruption, with Chief Minister James Stanhope notably receiving £50,000 in South Sea Company stock. Stanhope actually has merch on Amazon if you'd like to support his legacy. In response to the Bubble Act, the South Sea Company's stock peaked in early June, and investors began to sell. To counterbalance this, the company's directors ordered their agents to buy, which succeeded in further inflating the prices. Anticipating substantial profits, investors like King George I, members of Parliament, and physics legend Sir Isaac Newton invested. The idea was the company would use the money generated by ever-increasing stock sales to pay the interest on the national debt. The unprecedented sale of stocks kept generating higher and higher interests, pushing up the demand and price of the stocks. It was a self-perpetuating cycle, but as such lacked anything meaningful. The company was simply just trading itself against the debt that it had bought. Yet, by mid-July, shares were valued at a staggering £1,500. In August 1720, it all came crashing down. The bubble burst as a panic set in among investors. The British government intervened to mitigate the crisis by implementing measures such as suspending trading the South Seas Company shares. However, this did little to stop widespread unloading of shares, and by December, they had lost 80% of their value. In response to this collapse, Sir Isaac Newton said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Newton personally lost roughly $3 million in 2017 standards. The bubble burst had a rippling effect throughout the economy. At the height of the South Sea Company's value, many investors had bought shares on credit and had taken out loans. Now, banks cannot collect these loans made for the overpriced stock. Fortunes were lost overnight, and the public demanded answers. The public hysteria is captured in the 1720 newspaper lithograph depicting riots and caricatures of corrupt politicians. In response, the British government took drastic action, the most significant of which was the Act to Restore Public Credit passed in the summer of 1721, which reallocated and redistributed funds from beneficiaries, namely government officials, to victims. The panic from the South Sea bubble burst extended far beyond Britain. The company had many international shareholders, and when one domino fell, so did the rest. The panic most notably spread to France. Shareholders in the Mississippi Company, which held a business monopoly in French colonies in North America and the West Indies, pulled their investments, and the company went bankrupt. This sent even more panic throughout the world and led to the first international stock market crash. As such, the South Sea bubble is widely viewed as the first modern Ponzi scheme.